Hi, I'm Thaddeus Whacknamara, and until recently I was subcontracting for a first aid and emergency readiness supply distributor where I drove my little van around business to business all across my state, inspecting, installing, and replenishing all of the first aid kits and emergency response equipment that any of these businesses could require. As I was the new guy, I got the short straw, so I was given the creepiest of all of the different possible industries, the mortuary and funerary industry. The perspective I gained on the day that I installed my 100th automatic emergency defibrillation machine was profound. I stood there with my hands on my hips, surveying my work. It was square, it was secure, and it was effective. My grunts of self-approval echoed through the hall of the otherwise empty and desolate crematorium. I realized at this point in time that fairly useless things can be just fine. They're okay. Despite the fact that they're fairly useless and they're okay though, they can be highly controversial. And that leads us to today's topic of conversation. A new periodic square. Nobelium. What is Nobelium then? It's the 102nd element on the periodic table. It's an actinide, which is like a lanthanide in that it doesn't exist up at the top where things make sense in a relatively simple way. It's down in that bottom strip that nobody really gives a fuck about unless you're really into that sort of thing, which is hilarious because it also acts a little bit like ytterbium. I don't know how to pronounce 4 consonants in a row. It does a few interesting things, but the flip side is that ytterbium doesn't just fucking die. Nobelium wants to die. It's entirely synthetic. It doesn't exist in nature on Earth at least. It has a half-life ranging from 9.5 minutes down to fuck all. Absolutely fuck all. It literally just wants to die. Like all of the lanthanides and actinides, if I pronounced any of that correctly. So being an entirely synthetic actinide, what this means is that we have to make it using atom smashers, which I know accelerators, whatever. In this case, we're actually smashing atoms, and I'll get to that. It doesn't exist for long, and you can barely create any of it to begin with. So I apologize in advance to the 3, maybe 4 Nobelium chemists that exist out there. You've left me in a position where, just like your product, I don't have a lot to work with, so I'm going to have to see what I can do and probably get limited results. Let's start with the namesake of Nobelium, Alfred Nobel. He was the man who worked out that you could stabilize nitroglycerin into dynamite with the viewpoint that it would be used for mining and road clearing and boring tasks. Because it went boom, obviously it became quite interesting to people whose jobs it was to make people go boom. After a potential mistaken identity scenario where Alfred's brother died and the news everywhere printed, "The Merchant of Death is dead," Alfred didn't love that particular moniker. He didn't love being known as the Merchant of Death. For a guy who had over 350 patents, he was going to be known as the guy who blew pricks up. And that's before we take into account how his advances in mining made mining a much more lucrative industry. And let's not consider the downstream effects of that. Alfred decided to go out and put all of his money at his deathbed, will, time of death, 94, I think, % of his overall life earnings, which was not insignificant given he was the Merchant of Death and sold dynamite to everyone, was put into the Nobel Prizes. These exist in a number of different things: chemistry, physics, peace. He decided that he would like to be known forever after as the person who encouraged others to the highest heights of scientific discovery. Now, scientific discovery for its own right is definitely a thing, and that is very adequate when we talk about Nobelium. I don't know if I mentioned earlier that the actinides are all really radioactive. They all want to die. I know I mentioned that part. That means that they're actually really good candidates, if you can keep them alive for long enough, to accelerate them to 10% of the speed of light and smash them into other shit really hard. And that's how we make Nobelium. We take curium. Hold on to that one for later as well. We take curium and we get it spinning around and around really quickly until it gets to about 10% of C. Then we get a beam of some carbon, a particular carbon, not just any old carbon. We're not just throwing fucking charcoal into the spinner, though one might ask, why not? But we take a very particular carbon and we then start trying to spin it the other way. If we get our curium spinning this way and our carbon spinning this way really fast, and then we somehow, like two blokes trying to piss into each other's streams without getting a splashback effect, bounce them into each other, there is a chance that those things will become something new. And we end up with Nobelium and other things, but we're talking about Nobelium. Fuck off. For some reason, we don't like the word atom smasher, which is probably an appropriate thing. I don't know. Is the Hulk out of style these days? I personally identify with the Hulk smash. It's, generally speaking, an accelerator or cyclotron. To say there's a particle accelerator probably isn't the case because it's a fucking atom. And to say that a cyclotron is the right answer is just a nice way of saying you don't have an atom smasher sitting in southeast Melbourne just around the corner from the place where you get your fucking mower fixed. Because that's the thing. Also a good rub and tug up there next to the mower place. So to recap, we have two men peeing at each other. No. We have a very thin beam of a very rare and highly radioactive, already fucking weird element going around 10% of the speed of light. We take a carbon-12 and we start throwing it into the face of it. At least some of the time, when they hit, they don't reflect, they don't obliterate, they fuse. It's a form of nuclear fusion. It results in Nobelium, which will last between fuck all and 9 minutes. Get your skates on and start trying to work out what you can do with it. It makes literally a handful, not even, a few. A handful's a fucking exception. It makes a few atoms at a time. Most of them disappear. What you do to detect it is to identify what it fucks off to being rather than actually seeing the thing that you're working with. So you're looking at identifying how many things exist that might have used to have been the thing that you made in order to prove that you made a thing. And if the things that exist that might have been part of what you made don't have the qualities of the things that you made would decay into, then this is where we get to the controversy. Who cares? This is where shit gets real. Because we're pretty sure the first Nobelium made wasn't real. Before we discuss the controversies around whether or not it was made, who made it, where made it, how it's named, let's just think for a second. So little of this has ever existed. So little of this can ever exist at a time. So little of this is out there that if your bucket list item was to be in the room with a sample of Nobelium, you might as well scratch that out. Fucking write in eating kakapoo eggs. Because at least kakapoo eggs exist in a way that you might be able to get yourself a fucking omelette. And eating an endangered species is absolutely on my bucket list. The controversy begins. 1957, the Nobel Institute of Physics in Scandinavia somewhere decides that they've created Nobelium. They have accomplished the speedrun. They took some curium and carbon-13, which turned out to be the wrong carbon. Carbon-12 is the recipe. And they smashed them together, and they believed they created Nobelium. They couldn't replicate this, and despite the fact that their speedrun wasn't on video, they somehow managed to get the leaderboard position. Homies named it after their boy, as you can't really hate them for doing so. Nobody was able to verify this. Just saying. So in come the Americans out of Berkeley, and they go, "Here, rutabagas, hold my beer. We're going to do this again." And they used the correct recipe using carbon-12 and repeated the experiment, only this time they were able to measure it and they were able to reproduce it. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty convincing to me. As if 1958 Americans didn't put it to bed. About 8 years later, in 1963, the Russians joined the chat. As if it was Eve online back when it was still good. They came in out of nowhere. They used an entirely different approach. Instead of using curium and carbon, they used neon. Neon Russians and uranium neon Russians came in and made it again. They said, "We're doing it right. You guys have all had this wrong. The American imperialism extends to the periodic table. We demand satisfaction." But satisfaction they may not have received. You see, out of all of this, what we end up with is a bunch who didn't do something but got to name it. Americans who did do something but apparently maybe not as well as they could have. And a bunch of Russians who had the best record keeping and the most provable and repeatable evidence of the whole lot, but really, who was listening back then? It ends up named Nobelium. Should it have been? The Russians had suggested Joletium as its name, and since they did have a bit of a stake in this, it could have been argued the Americans were quite happy with Nobelium by all reports, despite the Russian recipe using uranium rather than curium. Joletium's namesake was the son-in-law of the Curies, so for something that was typically known to be created by smashing curium, Curies, with a bit of carbon, timber, it would have probably been a bit on the nose, or the eyes. The International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry decided that they were going to give their little homies nearby the namesake, but admit that they didn't discover it and instead give the discovery to everyone involved. Interesting factoid, the element number 102, which Nobelium has, if you put it into ASCII, is the lowercase f. Which again, apologies to all Nobelian chemists out there, but for something that you can't touch, use, or in any meaningful way actually apply, just saying, bit of an F. Despite Nobelium being about as useful as the sneeze guard in the cafeteria of a special ed school, that doesn't mean we can't make a good pop culture reference towards it. You see, there's this film called Minority Report starring Tom Cruise, where they have children who are telepathic or presentient in some degree, who make wooden balls telling you whether or not someone's going to commit a crime in the relatively near future. As good as a film as this is, and as much as I love seeing a guy tear his eyes out, put somebody else's in, and then fail to follow doctor's directions, the main character's ex-wife appears in there. You probably don't remember this because it's fucking useless. There's nothing. It maybe adds some texture. It fills a bit of a gap that no one was asking about. It's Nobelium. It's there for the sake of being there and because somebody wanted to prove that it could be. Love the eye thing. Which brings us to the tail end of this. I mean, what are we meant to do with all of this? We have an essentially useless element, acts like yttrium, can't actually make it, contain it, use it. It fills a part of the periodic table, which I suppose is a good thing, but why and what? And the short answer is because we should. There was a gap in the periodic table, and we were able to prove that we could build it. There is a theory, which I won't go into here, which is if we build enough of these heavy, dense, stupid elements that don't exist and shouldn't exist, that maybe somewhere we'll find a sweet spot where some of them stabilize and can exist. And I mean, as far as the asyntines, the fucking lower line of that goes, uranium is there, which means that some of them should be able to be useful, even though they all want to fucking die. The idea that if we keep on doing this, suddenly we're going to find a sweet spot where they stabilize is like me saying that my 35 kilos worth of weight gain is just me correcting for being in my fucking 40s. Also, fuck you, pizza. No, fuck you, pizza. I love you, pizza. What does become interesting, though, is that as we do knock some of these short-lived things on the head, we do find longer-lived ones, and we do find some niche uses for some of them. As somebody who believes that smashing piss streams together at 10% of the speed of fucking light and creating something new goes, I want to see more of it. I think we should try to absolutely complete the periodic table. I want to know exactly how many rings upon rings upon rings upon rings upon rings we can get before something horrendous happens. There's got to be a horrendous outcome there somewhere. It can't just be like zzz. There's got to be a point in time where we stuff so much in there, well, I don't know, we create another Big Bang. I doubt that, but that'd be cool. Fat fuck Big Bang. If this turns out to be true, I want to be attributed for it. And with that, I'm going to say that I hope you enjoyed our second speed date with the periodic squares. We're going to go for more of these, as I said, when I've got bigger things happening or when I couldn't be fucked doing something else. And if your job is to put little stickers on things saying not to be taken internally, and those things happen to be larger than my fist, remember, it's not as expensive as creating an entirely new element that, on average, lasts for less than 3 seconds, just so that you can say you have. I'm Thaddeus Whacknamara, and I'm whacking odd.